So the topic I'll be discussing with you all today are cultural implications that take place in a K through 12 educational setting. Now, before we jump into this discussion, I'm just curious to see how many of you all have previously or currently worked in a K through 12 educational setting? Go on, raise your hands, raise them up high. How many of you all have experienced the K through 12 educational setting? There you go. Good job. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this doesn't necessarily have to be limited to K through 12. It can also be in different work areas as well, such as college level. But we're really going to focus on the educator's perspective of this topic. Now, I have a list of everything I plan on discussing. First, I'm going to open with a quotation about culture that I feel will apply to everyone here. Next, we're really going to go in an in-depth discussion about what positionality is. Now, I know that there are a lot of different examples of cultural implications, so I made a list of a few that I feel are very important to this subject. And then after that, hopefully we'll have enough time left to discuss different experiences we have as educators. Now, culture is made up of many different aspects. It can be made of language, family, religion, different beliefs, many different things. It depends on our journey and everything we take in as we're growing up through life. Our culture is who we are and how we identify ourselves. It represents your positionality as a person, which eventually affects your students as well. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to go back and really discuss what positionality means. Now, positionality is who you are and how you identify yourself based on your journey, like what kind of job you had in the past or everything that you've been taught. It's the culture that you've been through, everything you've seen and taken in. So how do I share my positionality with someone not necessarily younger than me, but also older as well? For example, my positionality is I'm a black deaf man. My family is predominantly white, so I didn't really practice black culture, but I've learned about it as I've gone through life. Now, when I was growing up, I went to a huge deaf school. It was pretty much my life. And I really stuck by that culture being deaf. Now, black culture, other cultures, I pretty much forgot about. And by other cultures, I really mean racial cultures. It wasn't until I got here at Gallaudet in 2008, I really opened up my mind. I mean, I just learned so much about identity other than being deaf. I just saw different people and their experiences and saw how they went through their journey with their connection with their racial identity. It was a different experience for me, even for my own brother. Oh yeah, I have a twin brother, by the way. We both got to Gallaudet at the same time, but our experiences were different. I mean, my brother, he always knew how he identified. He was black, but I never had that connection with my identity. It was really because growing up, I was always influenced under the white perspective and all the expectations that came along with it. I think having that identity really impacted my positionality, which is really important. I mean, just imagine back in the day, or even now, you're just in front of your teacher, and your teacher's just presenting random stuff, throwing it at you, and you're just taking it all in. And then later, you're passing it on to younger deaf children. That's how positionality affects your students. Now, cultural implications can have many different factors. It might impact you, it might not. It depends on your journey. As a student or as an educator, there are many different obstacles that we see. So I have a few listed out. The first one we're going to talk about are stereotypes. I mean, everyone's seen some kind of symbol, some kind of word, interpretation, label, anything that has to do with racial identity. For example, black students, they're typically seen as the star athletes. Now, back in the day, I was a pretty good athlete, but I wouldn't say I'm the star athlete just because I'm black. I mean, I was also pretty good in school, but people seem to ignore that fact. Cultural implications can mean many different things. For me, it was deaf identity and black identity. Like language, culture, everything that you've gone through. Like for me, we already talked about deaf culture, deaf identity, the language, traditions, my perspective being at the deaf school, but what about racial identity? Racial identity is a sensitive subject for people, and it tends to be slowly taken away from discussions. So as educators, should we include that in our lesson plans, whether in history, math, or science? Now, language deprivation and cultural deprivation. As we know, 90% of deaf children are born to a hearing family, and I just happen to be one of those children. My family, which is hearing, who I love very, very much. Did they teach me about black culture? No, you already know they didn't. But I realized that they wanted me to be in connection with my deaf identity. They knew the obstacles I would face growing up, so they went ahead and sent me to the deaf school where I would learn how to sign. And I'm very thankful I was able to go to that school. But other students aren't granted the same opportunity as me, and this really affects their positionality. Now, language deprivation can also result from parents not being able to share their language with their child, whether it's Spanish or Black ASL, for example. Parents get nervous and they aren't able to provide that language for them. They only want to see their child become successful in life with the right perspective in mind, which is the white perspective. Barnhart, in 1981, he provided two different groups: cultural mainstream and cultural inspiration. Now, cultural mainstream prefers to just going by one culture, which is the white culture, and the expectations that come along with it. Getting married, getting a job, pretty much going on the same way. Now, on the other hand, there's cultural inspiration. That basically means practicing numerous cultures, more than one. So for me, I practice deaf culture and I practice deaf culture. They can mean many other different things. Those are just two I came up off the top of my head. But I just feel like to practice both. So my family, before they were Jehovah's Witnesses, they believed in Jehovah's Witness. And naturally I followed them. But my mom felt she didn't want that to impact my connection with my deaf identity. So she went ahead and sent me to the deaf school so I could immerse myself in deaf culture and learn about it myself. And I've always had so many questions about their beliefs. I would constantly question and study it wondering why they felt that was best for me. Then I finally realized, and I was so thankful for my mom that she allowed me to immerse myself so I was able to pick it up myself. But a lot of students aren't granted the same opportunity as me. It doesn't have to necessarily just be religion. It can also be language, different beliefs, or even like family members. When I say family members, I mean like how people surround themselves in certain small bubbles with close family members, but they aren't granted access to see their other ones that are further away from them. So it really just depends on each student and their experiences. So cultural mainstream and cultural inspiration can really vary depending on the student. Now, cultural problems can also be, I'm really referring to students of color in this reference, they don't have anybody they can look up to. Teachers are the number one source of teaching about racial identity and that connection. And they include a lot of white perspective in their lessons, which students are constantly taking in. But our job as educators is to provide true and accurate information to these students. And this means we have to give credit to each and every culture and recognize that. And I know it's not easy, but how do we become better support for those students? Those students that lack language, how do we become better help for them? How do we give out the proper information?